don't have a pick of who's the worst and who's the best. But one of the things we do need to talk about, though, is to Alan Tudge, because he's dealing with a really serious issue, and it's one that we want to talk about. So, Alan, thank you for joining us.
G'day, Peter. G'day, Peter.
Alan, can I start by saying this? You're a bit of a fan of the New Zealand model in terms of dealing with unemployment. Can you explain what the New Zealand model is, why you think it's a good idea, and what we can learn from the New Zealanders?
Yeah, I think there's three things which New Zealand has done which we're looking at and in part modelling ourselves from them. First of all, they simplified their payment system overall and tried to reduce, if you like, the effective marginal tax rates from going out of the welfare system into work. That was step one. Step two was they introduced what's called the social investment approach, which was a heavily data-based analysis working out which cohorts of people were most likely to be long-term welfare dependent and concentrating more effort on those groups of people earlier on in the cycle. And then the third aspect of what they did was some stronger mutual obligations, basically setting higher expectations upon people by saying that if you've got the capability to work, then we expect you to look for a job, to be attending the interviews and to be taking the job when it's available. We think those three things are worthy of looking at and learning from.
And let me ask you this. One of the challenges obviously is to get people into work. Are there enough jobs in Australia for people to actually go to work in, and do they have the required skills to get those jobs? I mean, I spend a bit of time in this area, and I worry about some of those unemployed who don't have the skills, don't have the education, don't have the training. So do we have enough jobs for those who want to get a job, and do they have the skills for them?
Yeah, it's a good question, Peter. I did a speech on Monday night at the Sydney Institute, and I said that our program must start from the opportunity perspective. That's almost step one, if you like. There must be opportunity. And that's why everything about the Turnbull government is trying to grow the economy to create more jobs. Now, at the same time, we also know that there are some regions and some pockets of Australia where the businesses can't find workers. Sometimes it's very entry-level jobs for those workers that they're seeking. But at the same time, you've got sort of quite high youth unemployment. So clearly there's a mismatch going on there. Now, we've talked before about fruit pickers, for example. You know, the orchardists can't get fruit pickers. The abattoirs can't get people. The tourism industry say that they're short by about 38,000 people, most of which are entry-level jobs. And yet they're often in areas too where you have high youth unemployment. So Peter, something's going wrong there in terms of that not matching up the available opportunities with the people who are there. And I think part of it is about actually our expectations upon those younger people particularly, encouraging them and believing that they can actually step up and take those opportunities. And that's was a big part of what I was saying on Monday night.
The problem, well, I see it as a bit of a problem, just on the question, though, of are there jobs? I take the point that you've made, but you've got the Greens saying, and I've got the numbers here, one of the Greens was saying, oh, listen, there's 430,000 jobs, but, you know, in the system, I should say, but only 177,300 vacancies. Now, what you've said is, well, it's a lot more complicated than that, but are there cohorts of people who really can't get jobs because that is their point of attack? We'll get on to the question of the opportunity, which I think is the real message, but I think to answer that question, I think is an important one.
Well, it depends on where you are, Peter. I mean, if you go into some of the remote areas, for example, I mean, there's clearly not enough jobs there for the people who are present. Now, I think part of that solution for those remote areas is that we need to encourage people to be more mobile, and our policy settings have to encourage people to do that. Yeah. In other areas, there are jobs available. We know that, for example, the number of people who are on unemployment benefits might be about 760,000 people at the moment. Yes, there aren't that many job vacancies today, but most of those people go in and out of employment quite quickly. Maybe about 3/4 stay on unemployment benefits for less than 6 months. It's the cohort which are on long-term unemployment benefits we get particularly worried about, because, as you probably know, the longer you're on welfare, the greater the road back to employment is, because you often lose your capability, you lose your capacity, your confidence, sometimes your mental health might deteriorate. So we have a great interest in ensuring that people don't become long-term welfare dependent. Yes, that starts with opportunity. We've got to continue to grow the economy, but I also think we've got to do some of those other things, such as what New Zealand is doing as well.
So what's actually happened here? Because it seems that we've had, in a legislative or regulatory manner, a system which says if you're on the dole, you've got to make an effort to get a job. But then we find in the papers today, if not, perhaps I think it might have been in your speech as well, that all these people who basically haven't lifted a finger to get a job, and the sadness of that really is that they never get the opportunity to actually understand what it's like to work in a business and to make a dollar and have the, the pleasure which people can have, the enjoyment people can have from standing on their own 2 feet. So is there any chance that we can...
That's exactly right, Peter.
So are we going to be able to, if we've got a system that says there should be sanctions, have we got any chance of actually making the sanctions work? And will they be stronger sanctions?
Well, that's what we want to look at, and in essence, that's what I was launching this week, was outlining some of the data, and some of which you have referred to there. On the surface, we appear to have quite a robust system of mutual obligations, but in the practical application of it, our analysis shows that it's not stacking up, and actually what it reveals is that our expectations upon capable people is often miserably low, when my view is that we should have high expectations of capable people, and we've got to believe in them. We've got to believe that they can look for work. We've got to believe that they can do that interview and can take that job. And to your point, like, any job is better than being on welfare. Even if it's a pretty ordinary job, picking fruit or cleaning or whatever, that is better than being on welfare. And if you do that job for 6 months or for 12 months, you'll be well positioned to get a more advanced job subsequent to that. And so we are going to look further at these mutual obligations, and to ensure that at every step of the way we're setting high expectations upon capable people. Of course, you've got to have your safety net in there, because life throws up unexpected things for people. You get sick, there's a tragedy in the family, whatever. Of course, we've got to accommodate that. But if you're capable and there's no tragedy, there's no sickness, there's no other reasonable excuse, then we expect you to turn up to that interview, and we expect you to take that job, and we have to back that up with policy.
Alan, let me ask you this. I noticed in your speech you made reference, and we've discussed it a bit, about high expectations. I noticed one of your ministerial colleagues, Mr Porter, was talking about investment approach. How do they work together? How does that work? How do they both sort of dovetail with one another?
Yeah, there's in essence 3 elements to our welfare reform agenda. The first is we need to simplify, and it's very similar to what New Zealand did. It is to simplify our immensely complicated payment system. We have 20 payments, believe it or not, and 59 supplements. And all of those interact in an enormously complex way. We have 10 different income tests in those payments. So that's the first thing we've also got to do. Second, this social investment approach is really using very detailed analysis to highlight particular cohorts who we know will be long-term welfare dependent based on previous experience and previous data.
Target them.
And coming up with and targeting those. Now, in New Zealand, for example, they targeted 2 groups initially. They targeted single parents, and they targeted people who went onto welfare when they're under 18. Now, with the single parents, they did additional support, additional investments. They did put some additional obligations upon those single parents. But the Finance Minister told me when I was in New Zealand a couple of weeks ago that now they've got 40% fewer single parents under the age of 20 on welfare payments than they did 5 or 6 years ago. Now, that's a huge achievement in my view if they're onto a better pathway. So that's the social investment approach. And then the overall mutual obligations, the higher expectations, is really to apply to all job seekers, to say that, we believe in you. We believe in your capability, and we're going to back that up with policy. We'll provide you with reasonable excuses, but we want to, after that, we expect you to do things, and there should be reasonable penalties if you don't.
And what about the debate about increasing the New Start allowance? Do you support that? What's your view about that?
Yeah, this is a debate which has been pushed by ACOS particularly, and by even some of the businesses. Now, the premise, I guess, is that the New Start alone is very little to work on, and sometimes people will say it's an impediment to actually job searching because it's too little. Now, I wouldn't want to live on just New Start alone. It's not a lot of money. However, the facts actually show that very few people do live on just the New Start payment. 3/4 of people actually get at least 2 additional supplements in addition to the New Start payment. That might be rent assistance, it might be some other sort of additional supplement. Of course, if you've got children, you end up with family tax benefits and other benefits. You'll get parenting payments and the like. In addition to that, 3/4 of people are on New Start for less than 6 months. So when you add those two facts together, that most people actually get more than New Start, and most people don't stay on New Start for very long, then I think, you really have to weigh up whether it's worthwhile investing what is going to be, I think it's about $7 billion to increase New Start by $50 per week.
Can I just ask you on the politics of it, do you have supporters like Noel Pearson, who've got a lot of experience in some of these issues, and do you have an expectation that you'll get a fair hearing, at least in the Senate? Because as I understand it, there's a regulatory hurdle there, and the way some of them operate, they might knock it off. But can you tell us what your chances might be on that?
It's a good point. Yeah, it's a good point, Peter. And listen, a lot of my thinking in relation to this space has been informed by Noel Pearson, who's been talking about welfare dependency for 15 years now, since his landmark speech back in the year 2000 called Our Right to Take Responsibility. And I suppose our starting proposition, and this is what we're trying to communicate to the broader community and through the broader community to the crossbenchers as well, is that welfare dependency actually is a very serious issue. And we now have tens, if not hundreds of thousands of people who suffer from welfare dependency. And in my view, long-term welfare dependency is an absolute poison on the soul, because it does become debilitating over time. And this is what Noel Pearson and other senior Indigenous leaders have been saying for an awful long time now. But it's not an Indigenous-specific issue. It's an issue about being passively dependent on welfare payments. So that's the overarching objective, is to reduce the level of dependency. And I hope that the crossbench and even the Labor Party will start to appreciate that, yes, we do have that problem. We've got a problem when 1 in 8 children are growing up in a jobless household, and 40% of those children are likely to be welfare dependent by the age of 20 themselves. Like, that is a serious moral challenge for our nation, which we do have to address. And I think we can address by doing some of the things which I've been referring to.
Alan, let me raise a very ugly topic as part of this. I had an association with one of the providers in another life, and I did visit a number of the offices and saw unemployed. And as you'd appreciate, my side of politics, as did yours, we are worried about the unemployed. We want to get them into work. But I found a lot of people without skills. There was alcohol, there was substance abuse, there was domestic violence in circumstances, there was a social dislocation. And that made it really difficult for them to get the confidence to actually take one of the jobs, even if they were offered. Now, I know this is a topic a lot of people don't want to talk about it, but it's a blunt reality. If you go to your providers, you will, as you know, have done, you would have seen it. So how do we actually deal with that ugly side of humanity where people need that bit of extra help or training or skilling?
Yeah, that's a good question, Peter. And again, I've done a lot of work in the Indigenous space, both before becoming a Member of Parliament and indeed while being a Member of Parliament. And you see that particular issue acutely in those, particularly the remoter Indigenous communities, although, again, it's not a Indigenous-specific issue, as you point out. It's in the inner city as well, and you see that. Once you start getting alcohol and you start getting drugs and you get family breakdown and domestic violence into the equation, it makes it really, really difficult. I was a bit taken, to be honest, again, by my trip to New Zealand just a couple of weeks ago, and I was there for a couple of days. When you go into the Centrelink office in New Zealand, their Centrelink equivalent office over there, Instead of what occurs in Australia when you walk into a Centrelink office and effectively they pull out the menu of payments which you can apply for, the first discussion they have with you is actually about how to find a job for you. And if you're a higher risk individual where you might have some of those issues, you get assigned a case manager straight away who can assist you with helping to get your some of those other aspects of your life together, be it a housing issue, or a domestic violence issue, an alcohol issue. And that case manager can help you manage that, as well as help you look for work and try to take an opportunity when it arises. In Australia, we've got a slightly different model where you go to a job service provider. Now, you know, we've got some very good ones out there and we've got some less good ones out there. They ostensibly do a similar thing. They get remunerated for placing people into work, but sometimes I think they struggle with some of those really difficult cases that you're referring to, Peter. Frankly, I don't think there's any easy answers for them. I think that New Zealand probably does it better than we do, and again, we're looking at that model to see if there's any lessons for us here in Australia.
Can I just ask, if time's getting away from us a bit, but can you give us a bit of a sense of the timing of all this? Are you looking at trial arrangements? How do you go about this? And of course, then you're going to face, sometime down the track, there's going to be an election, and the Labor Party will oppose it, of course, and run all sorts of scare campaigns. How do you manage that brute politics we seem to have these days?
Yeah, it's another good question, Peter. I mean, the social investment approach we have launched, we've done the data analysis already, so we know the cohorts which we need to target. And we have a $96 million fund which we want to, if you like, seed dozens, if not hundreds of different ideas to trial different methods of trying to tackle those more difficult cohorts. The payment simplification effort, we're being guided by the McClure Review, which Scott Morrison actually commissioned when he was Social Services Minister. And Christian Porter and I will have to go through a very consultative process as we go through that. And this process, which I'm talking about in terms of the mutual obligations as well, we're starting that process now. We want to have a broader conversation with the Australian people, and if you like, take them with us in terms of unpacking what the problem is and even help getting their advice in terms of what the solutions might be. Now, this will take us obviously into next year in terms of outlining what some of the potential policy answers are. But if we can take the Australian people with us, then I think we've got a good chance, therefore, of getting it into the Parliament and through the Parliament as well, Peter.
Alan, look, thank you for your time. There's nothing more important than getting young Australians or Australians jobs, so we wish you well, and we will talk again about this as the program rolls out.
Thanks very much, Alan. It's great to have you on. Yep.
All right, mate.
Thank you very much, Peter and Peter.